Johnny's Gone for a Soldier. And it's your classic woman's side of the experience. There goes my son, there goes my husband. And when he marched over the hill, you might never see him again, and you might never know what became of him.
You are listening to And If Love Remains, a unique show spotlighting people, ideas, science, culture, and art. Your host,
Mike Lovett.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, you are listening to that great podcast In the Sky, And If Love Remains. This is Mike Levitt, your sometimes virtuous, occasionally vile, but always virile host. And with your help, we will go viral by doing that thing that you do, by sharing, subscribing, you know the drill. Please do all that stuff. And today, this is one of those really great episodes that I've really been looking forward to. I reached out to Diane and my original email got sent back, and so I was all very concerned. But I reached out to her, and it worked out perfectly, and she was very gracious to come on. We're going to speaking to Diane Taraz. She is a folk singer, composer. Well, she's a singer, all around singer, but she does a lot of folk music, jazz, blues, standards. She creates programs that use the music of an era to show the inner lives of people who lived long ago. Women especially left behind few records of their existence, but the songs they use to speed their work, sing a child to sleep, or ease an aching heart shows us their minds and heart. Diane is on the scholarly advisory board of the Gilder Lehrman Institute of American History, based in New York City, brings her programs to museums, universities, libraries, and historic houses throughout New England. Very excited to have Diane Taraz on. Thank you for being on And If Love Remains.
You're welcome.
Well, Diane, I was introduced to you by the great Google in the Sky and YouTube. I was looking up different songs for a project that I'm working on. I was looking up different songs from the time period of the Revolution and came across your music. And first of all, Diane, I have to just start here. You have a beautiful, wonderful voice. I love hearing your voice. It's one of those voices that I could just, it's like butter. I could just listen to it forever. So I wanted to share that. First of all, I really recommend people listening to you sing, no matter what it is. But you came out with a song, an album called Songs of the Revolution. And then I was very excited when I reached out to you that you have a new album just out called More Songs of the Revolution. So which is great. we just good stuff. So let's talk a little bit about your background and how you got interested in folk music and doing this kind of historic music stuff.
Yeah, well, I started way back in high school with a book called 100 English Folk Songs. And I didn't understand most of them because they tend to start right in the middle of the most dramatic action. They don't explain who anybody is or what the setting is. You're supposed to know all of this stuff. And they were from hundreds of years ago. So as I proceeded into the musical world, I hung out with people who did folk music and heard a lot of it and heard it on the radio, Steel Eye Span, and groups, and just absorbed the language and gradually learned what they were all about. And then maybe about 15, 20. Oh, I also joined a band and learned a great many more songs from them. And then I was recording my own material that I had written, but I also always put in some folk songs. And I came up with a program called, well, I collaborated with a fellow who was doing a program called Images of Women in Traditional Song. He was a retired professor. So he talked about
Right.
songs in a very academic way, but he couldn't sing. So he had me to sing the song. And we did a bunch of gigs, and after a year or so, we parted company. But I came up with my own take on it and called it A Silver Dagger, songs about the lives of women in the past. And it was great when I did it, but I had a lot of trouble booking it. People didn't quite know what they were going to do with women's history. What were the men going to do while we talked about women's history?
Right.
So then I thought, well, if I change the focus just a little and make this Songs of the American Revolution, oh, everybody knows about that.
Right.
1776. So I did come up with a program, Songs of the Revolution, and then I made a companion CD to sell when I did it at various places. And that was the original Songs of the Revolution, a 21 song salute to the music of
Right.
1770. 21 songs on there. And I needed, a male voice in there because a lot of the songs are in the voice of a man, and sometimes I sing in the voice of a man. A lot of them show the woman's perspective, which is less commonly done.
Right.
Folk songs tend to get around this by often saying, "As I walked out one May morning, I overheard these people talking, and this is what they said." And then it doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman, you can relate the story even in the first person. So it's all a little, but I didn't want a male sound. So I got my friend, oh no, I knew this would happen. Jonathan Gilbert. Thank God. Jonathan
Oh, I've
Gilbert.
been there. My best friend. What's his name?
It's too full. There's too many lyrics in there. But anyway,
Right.
Jonathan not only sang on that first CD, but he contributed whistle and fiddle, and he did arrangements of instrumentals, and it was wonderful. And it really struck a chord. It is by far my best selling of my 2 dozen or so CDs. A lot of downloads and streaming as the world has progressed in England. People in England are particularly interested in this
That's
era.
wild. That's so interesting.
Lose this. I mean, it is English music because we were English.
Right.
It was very much a civil war. So then, of course, this led naturally to the Civil War, which is music
Mm-hmm.
100 years later, 150 years later, much more modern because the stuff from 200 years ago, it's just full of language that is hard to understand. Whereas the
Right.
Civil War is very much our era, even though it's a while ago, and gave rise to really all of our popular music, which all arises from the music of African Americans. It all came from there. And so then I did a program on mill workers and one on World War One, and various I've got, if you go on my website, there's a dozen or more programs that
Yes.
are evolving. But I realized it was time to do another dip into the inkwell, as it were. And I figured, well, I did so well with Songs of the Revolution. Let's call it More Songs. Purely a marketing decision. But in the intervening time between these two recordings, I had sort of gone further away from the actual time of the revolution. So this has songs that goes all the way back to the first Europeans who settled in Plymouth and their music, and
Oh, wow.
I find it just fascinating. There's a great song on there written just a few years in called New England's Annoyances. It's a 12 or 14 verse complaint about squirrels are eating the seeds and the deer are eating the corn, and it's so damn cold. It's just delightful. And I found someone had written an entire book about this song and figured out it was not written as part of the argument in England going on about whether you should come or not. Some people came and left immediately and went back to England and said, "It's terrible. Don't go to New England." But then others were saying, yes, yes, you should come, and for this reason. Actually, this song was written by somebody already here who was entertaining his neighbors with classic New England humor about how dreadful it is. And aren't
That's wonderful.
so that was a lot of fun. Of course, they were extraordinarily religious. They had but they didn't have
Right.
hymnals. They and they used the Psalms for all of their religious music, for all of their church music. So it was called psalmody. And one of the first books they printed was the Bay Psalm Book. And
Okay.
as an example, but the Psalms are just free verse poems. They're not really meant to be set to music. So they had to adapt them. And an example is perhaps the most famous psalm, the 23rd Psalm, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." They turned it into, "The Lord to me a shepherd is, want therefore not shall I." Yada 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 yada.
Wow.
So I have that on there. A couple friends of mine and fellow musicians, Lori Francis and John Yennis, we created a choir with the three of us. So,
Right.
it's a little wider and broader. It sort of gives you the whole atmosphere of the colonies from the time. And then we get up to a song like Katie Cruel, which was written around the time of the Revolution here, by
Okay.
a woman who, she says, "When I first came to town, they called me the Roving Jewel. Now they've changed their tune." She says, "They used to bring me the bottles plenty. Now they bring me the bottles empty." And it doesn't say exactly what kind of trouble she's gotten into, but something's not right.
Right. Right. You
The
know,
chorus, the chorus is just, let me give you a little bit of the
yeah,
chorus.
please.
It's like driving directions in Boston nowadays. "Oh, that I was where I would be, then should I be where I am not. Here am I where I must be, where I would be I cannot. Oh, little lily day, oh, dilly, oh, day."
Oh, wow. That's
So,
what, like, where am I? I
really,
am where I am, and I'm here where
I
I'm
wish
here.
I
And
could be somewhere else. Absolutely.
yeah, that's
So
wonderful.
that's on there. And then there's "The Girl I Left Behind Me," a classic. It became a fife and drum marching tune.
Yeah.
About how all the girls all over the world are so wonderful, but, my girl back home, she's got them all beat.
Right. Right.
Yeah,
You got to have somebody you're fighting for.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Um,
So that's kind of how that all came about. And now I don't really know anyone else who does this. I know people who embody characters from the past and talk
right.
about lives, but I don't know anyone who combines the music and the history. And the benefit is that the music is, if you can find original versions, which thanks to the internet you can now, you don't have to look at the version that went through the Victorian era and got all tidied up. You can go back and look at the original music in many cases, or the earliest version you can find, and you get all kinds of insights into what people thought and what their concerns were, and it adds emotion and immediacy to history that's usually not there. Usually, it's just the facts
Right.
or some dramatic battle or political things going on. But on the first CD, I did "Johnny's Gone for a Soldier," which has been
Mm-hmm.
one of my major YouTube, hundreds of thousands of views.
Yeah.
And it's your classic woman's side of the experience. There goes my son, there goes my husband. And when he marched over the hill, you might never see him again, and you might never know what became of him because, well, there was no government yet to
Right.
keep track of him. There were like lists of enrollments, but there were no telephones. If something happened to him, you had to hope that his commander or one of his comrades might write you a letter and let you know what had happened to him. If you
Wow.
got the letter, perhaps you
R-
decided he was dead. Occasionally, after the service, a few months later, here he comes over the hill. My goodness, Stop. And hopefully, in the meantime, you hadn't remarried or anything terrible like that.
Right. I'm sure there was maybe once or twice that happened.
It had to. Yeah, it had to. Or you waited a decent interval because, like I said, that was just communications were so poor back then, and
Hmm.
the organization just didn't exist. Even in the Civil War, there was at the beginning of it no dog tags, no very few records kept. By the end, everything had become very organized. So that was amazing
Right.
change in the Civil War, but certainly in the time of the Revolution. So, and there's no politics in this song. It's just, oh, damn, he's gone. And I'm so sad about it.
Right. There,
So I
there's
used it with all the emotion that I could. And it's one of these songs that doesn't even have verse and chorus. It just has the same music for all the verses, which gets a little wearying. So I made up an interlude. I put in a couple interludes, which I think of as keening, as wailing, mourning, and that really livens it up. And then I played it on the dulcimer, which is another very antique sound, very old instrument. So that is, kind of an example. We take not what the war is all about, not even why he enlisted. We're right down to he's gone. And I
right.
don't know if I'm ever going to see him again, which was the experience of so many parents and wives and sweethearts and children, for that matter.
Right. And yeah, war is such a terrible thing, and in any context, but especially in the context of, and I do think about this, the devastation of losing a husband, you know, especially in that kind of rural community where, you know, trying to keep up a farm, trying to keep up, a livelihood and raising children, without a husband during that time was it's not the same as it is today. I mean, it was
Not at
very,
all.
very difficult.
Yeah, and most widows and widowers, if they had children, married very quickly after they
Right.
were bereaved. Just a few
Yeah.
months of that, because life had to go on, and
Right.
you needed people to make it go.
Yep. Well, talk a little bit about your process of discovering, researching. I, I'm thinking a little bit about the hymns you mentioned at the beginning. Some of those early religious songs, because I've seen some old hymnals and how they work, and it's interesting to me how, a lot of those old hymnals, you'd have the lyrics, and then you'd have like different tunes that you could put those lyrics to, and so a lot of times, what was the original tune that went with that? Well, we really don't know. So talk to me about your process of like trying to decide which tunes, deciding how to put all that together.
Exactly. Well, hundreds of years ago, tunes and words were not nearly as connected as they are now. Like you said, hymns, tunes would have many sets of words. In fact, in many hymnals, you go to the back and there's a metrical index, which shows you which tunes have the right number of measures to go with which sort of poetry. And
Right.
so a hymn would be sung to all kinds of tunes. A great example is Amazing Grace. I think a major part of the appeal of that is that amazing melody, which has Scottish roots, it has black roots, it came from, we really don't know, in the early 1820s, 30s, somewhere in there. That's when the melody we sing it to arose. But the words were written in 1780-ish by a slave trader who his ship was in a storm, and as people do, he promised God that if he lived, he would stop selling people. And he did. He was saved. So when he says, Amazing grace that saved a wretch like me, that's what he means. He was a wretched
Right.
human being. So he wrote that as a poem with no music at all. And you see notations of what you were suggested to sing it to. There was a melody called Hepzibah. There was a melody called Tisbury. So
Hmm.
it had different, and to really blow your mind, let me give you a little Amazing Grace to Tisbury.
Okay.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see, was blind, but now I see, was blind, but
Whoa.
now I see, was blind, but now I see. It's just like, what
Oh,
is.
I certainly was not expecting that refrain. Wow.
And you know why they did that? Nobody had any hymnals. It was way too difficult and expensive. Not only they might have had words, but they certainly didn't have music notes. That creating something like that was beyond the printing presses, and it would be incredibly expensive. So
Right.
once you get to the end there and you know what the words are, well, let's sing it three more times. And they used to line it out. Someone would sing the first line, the congregation would repeat it. Someone would sing the second line, repeat. So that was part of that as well. But yeah, the whole feel of it is we're marching on.
What a different, yeah.
And I haven't looked into what Hepzibah is, but I'm sure it had an equally different sound. So, like I said, eventually it found its way to that beloved melody, which is so evocative, and the combination of the words and the melody is probably the favorite hymn, or America's favorite hymn for sure. So yeah, I mean, when I'm looking for music, one of the keys is trying to go back as far as you can. And thank God for digitized, Googleized. You can now, instead of having to drive to Maryland to some library and get the book off the shelf, you can see it right there on your computer. And the way they do the books is great. They do the first page, then they do the blank second page with the library's name on it, then they do the blank third page, then they do the fourth page with the copyright information. It's like, okay, let's get
Right.
the whole thing. So you can see the original, because over the years, especially music, when we hit the 1800s, people started cleaning things up. They said, "Oh, that's an unladylike thing for that character to be doing. Let's take that out. Let's change this so it's not quite so sexual." And
Right.
there's a lot of great songs from the past that are very frank about sexuality and all kinds of issues. Impotency, there's a great song called "Me Husband's Got No Courage in Him,"
Oh.
because she's still a virgin after 5 years of marriage, and she's just in despair.
Oh, wow.
And so,
Wow.
oh, that really, of course, the Victorians would never sing anything like that. But happily,
Right.
there it is before that time. So one of the tricks is to find what are called primary sources, not the telephone game later, but although those can be very interesting to see what people did with music and how it moved along. Um, on the new CD, More Songs of the Revolution, I do "To Anacreon in Heaven," which was the original song that we now sing the national anthem to. It was a song for a gentleman's drinking club. And it's just full of, Greek mythology. That was how you showed you were educated, because that was education, learning Greek and Latin and all that stuff. So, but that melody had been used for a whole bunch of different sets of words, including some by Francis Scott Key, before he set, "Oh, say, can you see" by the dawn's early light. It was well
Right.
known all over the place because it was such a great melody. Da, da, dum, 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 da. And we find it
Yes.
very hard to sing now. Everyone starts really low. But I find music from hundreds of years ago is usually very complex and challenging and has wide ranges. And it's interesting. I guess part of your education then too was to learn to sing and learn to dance and learn to comport
Yeah.
yourself. And they're not simple.
Well,
Some of
the
them.
range of emotion that you find in these, that's one of the things I think I love about folk music and folk songs. It is so real and so human, and And as you mentioned, like you do feel just thrown into this strange world if you're not familiar with it.
Mm-hmm.
I think you mentioned the song before. I think one of the most poignant and interesting songs is that song, "The Silver Dagger," that
Mm-hmm.
you perform, because it is in some ways it's so relatable, and yet it's I don't know. I mean, it's relatable in the sense like it's. Why don't you explain what the song is about, and because I think there is a modern context to it.
Mm-hmm.
So
Well,
what is? Yeah, go ahead. What is the Silver
oh, the
Dagger
silver
about?
dagger. Well, it starts right in the middle with a woman sleeping next to her mother and sharing a bed, which most people did several hundred years ago. Nobody had their own bed. Sometimes a whole family had one bed. Everybody piled in, and it was good in winter to keep from freezing to death. So she's sleeping next to her mother, and here comes her lover, and she says, "Shh, don't wake her up." In her right hand is a silver dagger. She's ready to act, and what she's doing
Yeah,
is protecting her daughter from her own fate. Because in a wonderful verse says, "My daddy is a handsome devil. He has a chain 5 miles long. On every link a heart does dangle. Of another maid he's loved and wronged. He is
yep,
a rascal." And obviously, knocked up mom, and she's not going to let this happen to her daughter. So she's sleeping with a knife.
right.
It's
It's
not going to work.
no,
Life is going to go on, but it's a fascinating moment of determination, and at least during the song the girl says, "Go back home. I'm not gonna have anything to do with you or any other man." So at least for the
hmm
moment she's getting the message.
right. But to me, it really speaks to that. Um, I don't know that very mother bear spirit of like I'm going to protect my kin no matter what,
No matter what.
and even to maybe to their own detriment
Well,
sometimes.
yes. Yes. And if she happens to do somebody in, well, that's not going to end well for her either.
Right. That won't be a good. Yes, but
Yes,
I
it's
guess it's about the threat.
yeah, it's a great example of how folk songs are drastic. I mean, they're just everywhere. Well, first of all, you don't want a song about a boring thing. You want the most exciting thing you can think of, and and just I've just lost my train of thought. Oh well, it'll come
No,
back
yeah,
around.
you're right though. That you want them drastic, especially if you're
Oh,
going to
well,
sing them
that's
over
what
the
I'm saying.
campfire
The
every day
people
after
who
day.
created them were not subtle. These were people from the lower working classes. They were struggling to survive, and they're not so much interested in the doings of the wealthy beyond gossip. You know, a lot of songs are gossiping about nobles and kings and queens. That was entertaining, just as we still find it entertaining. What do
Right.
they do now, those royals? The livelier the better. But they had very concrete concerns, and they sang about them. And the nice thing about singing is you don't need training, you don't need an instrument. It's nice to have, but you can just do it, and you can do it while you're doing other things like churning butter or walking a great deal. There's a great song that starts, "As I was a walking," we says, "We had not been walking but a few miles together." It just tosses that out. That was not unusual. We just
Right.
set out the front door and walked 5 miles. Yeah, what's unusual about that? We don't do that anymore.
We don't do that anymore, right? We
No.
drive our car to the mailbox.
We drive our car to the gym, the classic thing, and
Right.
complain that we
That's
can't park
classic.
close enough, and it's too hot in the parking lot, and then it's too cold. There was a wonder. I've also read a tremendous amount of history, and there's been such wonderful history that looks at people's everyday lives. And there's a particularly fascinating one called Albion's Seed by David Hackett Fisher, I believe is his name. He's a professor, And he looks at how the people who came here came from four main parts of England, and each had their own distinct personality. In New England, they came from this spot in the Eastern Midlands that had been trouble for centuries. This was where all the revolutions started, all the dissent, and that's where the Pilgrims came from, and
Mm-hmm.
the Puritans. And he shows how that character, rushing around, always busy, 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 has persisted. I mean, people who move here from laid back parts of the country and the world, before you know it, they're Yankees running around, complaining incessantly.
Right.
Then there's the people who came from the southern plantations, settled in Virginia. They were slow. They talked slowly. In fact, their accent was what we think of as the black dialect of, Mark Twain and whatnot. That was how their owners spoke. So that was how their slaves spoke, that
Right.
accent. And they just sat on the porch and had a mint julep and took it easy. What's the
Right.
point rushing around? Then you had the Quakers who settled in, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and they were busy but not wasting any time. And everyone
Mm-hmm.
was on the same footing, and you made sure you were always doing something worthwhile, and everything was very well organized. And then what's great is later in the book he tells you different characters, like Patton was from the Scotch Irish, who came from the Scottish border where they had been fighting for millennia. They came here, the only land left was the border, where they had
Uh-huh.
to fight with the Indians. So they just kept right on fighting. So, like, Patton was out in front of his tank column, Scotch Irish border
That's
raider.
so classic.
Richard Nixon was a Quaker type from the
You're
Midwest.
right.
Dwight Eisenhower, leading the whole Western military, never was in a battle himself, but he organized.
Right.
And, even when people move to other places, they tend to keep it's a really fascinating book. And that he goes into the language, and the language is great.
Well, in fact, it's funny. I had a friend of mine mention something about his family history, and he was asking me about mine, and asking where my family when they came to America and such, and and my family, like John Levitt came over to the New England area. The way the family lore is he was apprenticed to somebody in England and jumped his apprenticeship and
Yeah.
came over here and was caught, went back, but then ended up coming back to America, and so that's kind of the legacy of that kind of free spirit. Don't tell me what to do. You're not the boss of me.
And one of the penalties back then for committing crimes in England was to be transported. Australia was not yet the convict place to send people. They sent them to New England. And they had to serve, a certain number of years being someone's servant, essentially
Mm-hmm.
a slave, but it had a fixed time limit. And when they were done, they could either go back to England or they could stay here. Most of them stayed here because you had a
Interesting. Yeah.
slightly better chance at setting up a life for yourself. Not
Wow.
much.
Yeah. I had oh, see, I'm doing the same thing, only I'm
Yeah.
not going to remember his name. Murray. His last name is Murray. We're going to call him Professor Murray. He's a professor he wrote the book Scotland. Um,
Hmm.
and I talked to him about the Jacobites and some of their influence, coming to America with Hugh Mercer and a bunch of these patriots that came, and some of the songs that they brought, and some of the music because they were so they hated the king so much, and
Hmm.
they really desired to, and they had these like secret songs that they would sing to show their loyalty to liberty, and their defiance of the king in subtle ways that wouldn't get them in trouble necessarily.
Right.
Um, and I just find all that stuff just so fascinating
Hmm.
of what people do to um, to communicate the things that they love, the things that they hate, the things that they desired. Music is such an important part of that
Mhm.
whole communication process.
Right. And the African American experience. I mean, the
Yes.
original spirituals were slave songs, and they were filled with code about how to escape. Swing Low, Sweet Chariot is not really about getting to heaven, it's about getting to the north. And the chariot coming to get me with Moses, which was the name for Harriet Tubman, was someone to help guide you north. Wade in the water that said, walk in a stream so the bloodhounds can't track your scent. There's just filled with code. And of
Mm-hmm.
course, the owners love to hear their enslaved people singing. Listen how happy they are in the fields. Of course, anytime they were singing about Pharaoh or the devil, that was you. And
Right.
wishing you would head off as soon as possible to whatever your reward or punishment might be.
Fat. Yes.
Yeah.
There's a song that I can't get enough of off the first Revolutionary album. I love it so much. It's "Come Here, Fellow Servants." I don't know
Oh,
what it is about that song and about that melody. It's so fun. Talk to me about that song. Um,
well, that I found that in a play. It comes from a play written in London. A lot of the music and popular things that came to the colonies were from London plays.
mm-hmm.
Um, and wasn't a musical. There was one song in this play, and that was "Come Here,
Okay.
Fellow Servant." The play was called "High Life Below Stairs," and it's about a man who disguises himself as a servant to spy on his employees and see if they're
Okay.
cheating him or whatever. And this song at the end, the message is that, livery was the special clothes that servants wore. It says, we're all in a livery. Everybody serves something. We're all. And it has this air of equality that is so unusual then. It says,
Right.
nature made all alike, no distinction she craves. I mean, that was not the prevailing philosophy. The prevailing
No.
philosophy was that God was in charge of everything, and he had placed everyone exactly where they belonged. And if you were a servant or enslaved, that was what God had made you to be. So it was like sinful to question your status. And this song is just flying in the face of that. Now,
Yeah.
it does say at the end, we'll drink like our betters and dance, sing, and love. They do recognize some people are better off. There are betters and lower classes. But it says, and then it says, when sick of one place to another, we'll move. For with
Right.
little and great, the best joy is to rove. I mean, could there be a more American
Not at
philosophy
all.
than that? We've been getting up and moving ever since we got here,
Well,
and
I
all
even
the
think that
come.
that line about we'll drink with our betters, like to me it feels like even today, like when I'm driving in my older car, and I'm driving in Scottsdale or something like that, and I see these beautiful Teslas and these Mercedes, and I think to myself, you know what, like they're going to the same place,
Yeah.
they're not driving any faster than me,
No,
like there's nothing that's like technically more, I mean maybe slightly more comfortable, but like there's nothing different about it. So when
right.
we'll drink like our betters, we're gonna dance, we're gonna play, we're gonna have fun,
That's
and
it.
we'll probably have more fun because we don't have to be so uppity.
Probably, yeah, just like on Titanic, she had the most
Right.
fun below decks dancing with the low class people. But yes, it has this wonderful bouncy melody, and I could see the original play, and I could see the original music. So I know that that's and the words. So, and what happened is that the song made its way across the ocean and started being sung,
Mm-hmm.
first in New England and then traveled around the other colonies, and everybody liked it. So they sang it a lot. And it's subversive message, must have
Yes.
percolated through to hear, especially if you heard your servants singing, oh, nature made all alike, no distinction she craves. What?
Right?
I'm better than you, obviously. Also, if you were better off, it was considered a sign of God's grace. So I mean, it's a dreadful philosophy that
Yes.
blames people for anything bad. Well, if something bad happening to you, it's because you're a sinner, or you're paying for the sins of your parents or your grandparents. The whole idea of guilt was a major.
Oh, that caste system that
Yeah,
that we see, more recently, like in India and stuff, is just an awful,
yep, yeah. We
philosophy,
still
because
have a
it
very
traps
classist.
people.
Yeah, still have a very classist society. We're trying,
Yes.
but it keeps. You know, I'm not going to get into the current politics, but it seems there's always a backlash. You make some progress where
Hmm.
average people get a little toehold to make their lives better, and then there's a backlash.
Right.
So I feel like we're in a major backlash right
I
now.
agree. I agree. I think there's times are changing, and it here it was funny, and again, I want to keep this, very ancient, 200, 300 years, but I did find it interesting. My father was talking about um the oh, I'm trying to think. He was talking about it was during the pandemic and how we were locked down and things of that nature. And he just said, the difference between now and the '60s revolution is we have no great songs. We don't have any great protest songs right now. We need more great protest songs.
Yeah,
And because I feel that way. Like we need some more good protest folk songs that can that people can sing and really get their feelings out.
yeah.
Another great song I'd love for you to share your feelings about, and it's one that everybody knows, everybody's grown up with it in America, is Yankee Doodle. Um,
Yankee.
it's a wonderful song, and it's funny because it was, from my understanding, it was meant as a making fun of the Americans. Is that right? Am I right
That
about
is
that?
that is right. During the French and Indian War, the 1750s, New England was fighting France. Well, England was fighting France for control of North America. There was a colony called New France up in Quebec. And so George Washington was a lieutenant or something, or maybe a captain in the French and Indian War. He was a British soldier, of course. And the colonists, the militia, joined with the British and they went off to fight. And so one of the British officers was less than impressed with the Yankees. He felt they were perhaps cowardly. He kind of questioned their hygiene. He really didn't think much of them. So he wrote a song making fun of them. And he actually used a slightly older melody. He, of course, didn't make up new music. People always used older melodies that were floating
Sure.
around.
No
And this
copyright at that
melody
time, thank
was so
goodness.
old, it was called The Air from Who Knows Where. And so he wrote this. Brother Ephraim sold his cow and bought him a commission, and then he went to Canada to fight for the nation. But when Ephraim he came home, he proved an arrant coward. He wouldn't fight the Frenchmen there for fear of being devoured. And then Yankee Doodle, he calls him Yankee Doodle, and that's a slightly older version of the melody. We have
Yeah,
different
I
slightly, and
noticed
I
the
do them
difference.
both on there. I start with the older one, and then I do the newer one.
Okay,
But
yeah.
but the whole thing of putting a feather in his cap. Well, a doodle is a fool, a silly person, Yankee Doodle, and a grown man on a pony looks ridiculous. And the feather he stuck in his cap, he thinks it makes him just as fashionable as a macaroni. And a macaroni was started in Italy and spread throughout Europe and England. A young man just encrusted with powder and lipstick and lace and
Oh,
stocking
wow.
and a huge wig that looked like you'd dumped a bowl of pasta on your head. So it was called a macaroni wig. And then it used that term to refer to these foppish men, these macaronis, these fashion plates.
Right.
So the joke is the turkey feather isn't going to do it. You're not
Yeah,
as
yeah.
as a macaroni. You can find great old engravings of macaronis. They're wearing high heels and lace cutaway jackets and the wig and the whole. It's
Oh,
just.
that's wonderful.
I mean, men were peacocks back then, and women, but the men have kind of retreated into a monotone wardrobe now. The women are
Right.
allowed to be flamboyant, unless you're a drag queen.
That's true. That's true. Things are a changing.
Um, so, um, so then, 20 years later, we hit the American Revolution, and both sides are playing this wonderful melody, which is great for marching along and for your fife and drum corps to keep you going if you got to march 6 miles, whatever, 10 miles, 20 miles. Um, and slowly the Yankees adopted it as their theme song, and made up new verses, dozens of them.
Uh-huh.
Some of them were rather rude. They're rude. You can find the rude ones if you like. And but then most of them, there was a classic, template that a young boy visits a military camp and he's just agog, at everything that's going on. They're running around and it makes him scared when they shoot off cannons and yada, yada, yada. So, but then, of course, when the Constitution was ratified, new verses appeared, and I put
Yes,
in
of
a
course.
couple of those at the end. So a good melody just got used over and over and over.
Right.
And this song never had any political content. There are lots of other songs with all kinds of, you know, arguing. This was just for fun, just to keep you
Yeah.
going.
My my understanding, if I remember the story right, is that again, kind of in mockery, the Americans sang the Yankee Doodle as the British were surrendering in Yorktown. Is did you hear? Have you heard that story?
I've heard
I mean,
that story. I have also, that may be apocryphal. I've also heard that
sure.
they played a tune called The World Turned Upside Down, which seemed very appropriate
Yes.
for this
Yeah.
great power surrendering to these country bumpkins. I have read from a primary source, and then once again, remembering the name, Lucy and the guy who brought the cannons to Fort Ticonderoga. I can't remember his name, but anyway, he wrote a letter to his wife, Lucy,
Okay.
about the surrender. And he said one of the terms was that they could no longer play Yankee Doodle. Put that song away. We want your
This is
guns and swords, and you won't be playing Yankee Doodle anymore.
that's awesome. Oh, that's the kind of pettiness that I can appreciate.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, yeah.
um, before we finish up, I want to ask you just maybe some hidden gems, some songs on your newest album that you maybe yeah, that you find as hidden gems that you love that people should look for.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we talked about Katie Cruel and New England's Annoyances, and the Lord to be a shepherd is. Oh, there's a wonderful one called Blue Cap for Me. It's a Scottish, and I added this wonderful Scottish feel to it with
Mm-hmm.
fifths, like a
Oh yeah.
bagpipe. And this woman has a whole bunch of suitors. She has a guy from Italy. She has a Spanish fellow. She has a German with mighty mustaches. And she rejects them all and says, no, if ever I have a man, blue cap for me, because
Oh,
Scottish men wore blue caps. And so
right.
finally, at the end, a guy comes along with a blue cap, and he was the party for whom she had tarried.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Tarried. And it's a great song. Yeah. Um, there's a great one, just very short, happy. Well, it's a happy song, but it's a lament. It's called Hedger and Ditcher, which I learned from Maddie Pryor and June Tabor. I think it's on their Silly Sisters album. They've been big heroes of mine. And it's a girl who wants to get married, but as she says, the money comes slowly in, and she needs a dowry and doesn't have one. And she says, oh dear, must I die an old maid? Oh dear, how shocking the thought. There's nobody coming to marry me. Surely it's not me own fault. It's also kind of funny.
Oh, that's great.
And one of my favorites, the Battle of the Kegs.
Okay.
This was written by Francis Hopkinson, who was a real rascal. He signed the Declaration for one of the colonies, and he wrote copious things. He wrote a satirical play. He would write an essay in one issue of the newspaper under a pseudonym. And the next week he'd write under a different name, arguing with himself, saying, no, 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 that's not. Nobody knew it was the same. He was a real rascal.
Oh,
So
that's
he wrote
great.
this song poking fun at the British panic when the colonials filled some kegs with gunpowder and tried to use them as mines, and they didn't go off. They did no damage, but the British totally panicked, and for a day and a half they blasted every bit of wood in the Delaware with their cannons and their muskets and everything. And Francis just makes complete fun of them. It's a fun little thing, and so I managed to find on this site called Pixabay, which is public domain, free images and sound effects. I
Okay.
found the sound of a cannon, and then you hear the ball go plop in the water and bounce, splash, splash, splash.
Oh, that's fabulous.
And then they had the sound of a crowd panicking, so I've got that in there. So that one is totally fun. And the last one I'll talk about is I put one on there that I wrote. The very last song is the Ballad of Deborah Sampson. She was a woman from central Massachusetts who, after the surrender, there was an insurgency going on for a couple of years, and yet all the regular soldiers went home. So
Right.
she managed to disguise herself as a man and enlist in 1783 and served for a couple years as Robert Shirtliff. She got away with it because she was very tall, taller than most men at the time, and young and strong, and they were desperate. And so she served. Then she was wounded, and they found her out. But they instead of condemning her, they cheered for her. And a number of years later, Paul Revere convinced Governor John Hancock to give her a military pension,
Oh,
which she
wonderful.
richly deserved. And then she went on tour as one of the first women to speak in public. She put on once her children were grown, she would put on her old uniform and hire a hall and march up and down, do drills, and talk about her experiences. And as I say in the song, people came like flies to honey.
Oh, yeah, I bet.
And she made some ready money that way. So I wrote a song about I could really haven't seen a song about her. So I said, well, she definitely needs one. So I wrote
Yes.
that one and put it on there. So
And that's called The Ballad of
Ballad of Deborah Sampson. And
Deborah
her name was
Sampson.
Samson. And of course, before long, people put a P in there because she
Hmm.
seemed like the biblical strong man, Samson. She had to be named Samson. You can't let
Right.
the facts stand in the way of a good story.
That's right.
It was actually
Exactly.
Samson.
Oh, well, what is first of all, well, second of all, third of all, I don't know. Thank you very much for being on the show. This is like I love talking about it. Really, it takes me away from, some of our daily grinds, and it's so beautiful. I appreciate you taking the time to talk about these beautiful, wonderful songs.
Oh, thank
What's the
you.
best way for people to find your music, buy your music, support your work? How can people do that?
Well, they can stream or download or purchase my. Well, I don't know that you can get physical CDs anymore. We've kind of passed that point. But
Right.
certainly streaming and downloading and purchasing it online at Amazon or Pandora, Spot. I'm on all the streaming services. You
Okay.
can go to my website, which is Diane Taraz, Taraz.com. And if you want a physical CD, I'm happy to provide you with that old technology. You can send me an old fashioned check to my old fashioned post office box.
Hey, I
And I
like it.
take a physical thing and put it in an envelope and mail it to you. It's miraculous.
Whoa. And it just shows up.
And you know,
Uh,
a few years ago, I was just about to get rid of my post office box because
yeah.
nothing came there. But it's box 1066. It's the
Oh,
Battle
how
Stakes. I
how
couldn't
could
get
you get
that
rid?
up. I don't know
No,
how
it's
I got that.
perfect.
Many years, 35 years ago, I got that number. And my husband kept saying, no, no, you have to keep it. You have to keep it. Well, sure enough, now regularly I get pieces of paper with writing on them and checks. And I put the physical CD in and mail it off to somewhere. So you can always order the CDs from me. I don't know that you can get them on Amazon and other places. They're just not doing CDs anymore.
Yeah.
I
Wow.
began my
Well, that
career just as LPs disappeared and CDs came about.
right. And now
And now,
LPs are coming back.
yeah, now I've reached the point where LPs sold more last year than physical CDs.
Isn't that crazy?
Chew on that a little bit.
Right?
No, I'm not going back to the LP. I'm not going to do that. But what's nice is my music goes all over the world and I don't have to go there. You know,
Yes.
I get sales, downloads. I get not what I should get, but I get a little bit of income from all of
Right.
these times that it's played in all of these countries: Japan, New Zealand, Spain, Mexico, Canada, New York,
Now you
Florida.
also put on online concerts. Are you is that something you're still doing and
Oh,
can
yes,
people
I do first Saturday concerts via Zoom, so you can be anywhere. And if you want to join my mailing list, which you can do on my website, dianetaraz.com, I send out an email once a month. That's really the only time I send it, with the link. And you can zoom in, and I sing for about an hour. Sometimes there's a theme, and sometimes there isn't, but I always have a great time. So
Oh, very good. Well, I'll be tuning in a few times. I think that because I love your voice. I love the things that you do. So, thank you for being on And If Love Remains, Diane. Thank you so
thank
much.
you for having me. It was
Hope,
delightful. As you can
hopefully we'll
tell,
do
I
it again.
talk about this stuff.
Oh yeah, so we'll do it again. I know I didn't dig all of your stories out of you.
Hmm. Yeah, well, I just recently wrote a book. We could talk about that too.
Mike is gone.
You are listening to And If Love Remains.
First of 23 installments requested by Dr. Levitt. Trying to be in compliance here because we're taking him and that whole organization down.